The light filtering into the grand conclave of the Zylosian hegemony was not light, but a controlled, shimmering cascade of polarized energy, illuminating the obsidian facets of the central dais where the hierarch sat. It was a space designed not merely to house assembly, but to compress the will of 1,000 subjugated worlds into a single, terrifying consensus. Around the vast, concave amphitheater, the representatives of the prime vectors, the Krill, the Cygnian syndics, the silent, crystalline emissaries of Viridia, shifted their visual receptors, their collective anxiety manifesting as a barely perceptible dissonance in the environmental harmonics. Fear, for the Zylosians, was a calculated strategic asset, but this pervasive, unmanaged apprehension was corrosive. They had spent cycles studying the faint, chaotic transmissions from the pale blue world designated Sol 3, and the data made no logical sense. The designation given to the inhabitants, Homo sapiens, was proving to be the most misleading label in recorded galactic history. Hierarch Thrax, his multifaceted sensory organs focusing the polarized illumination, registered the mounting pressure from the vector seats. The holographic projection hovering above the central plinth pulsed with the trajectory data of the Vanguard fleet, a fleet so vast it distorted local spacetime readings. Yet, the latest telemetry, transmitted only moments ago from the advanced scout vessels positioned just beyond the Uit cloud of the target system, was inexplicable. The Zylosian strategic doctrine, refined over 10 millennia of relentless expansion, relied on predictable variables, resource saturation, technological disparity, and psychological warfare culminating in swift capitulation. Humanity offered none of these predictable curves. Their existence appeared to be a statistical anomaly, a brief, violent flash of self-destruction followed by an unnerving, profound silence. The initial assessment had been reassuringly arrogant, a primitive, volatile species that had finally managed to weaponize its own planetary instability. Now, that arrogance was curdling into a strategic nightmare. Krill delegate Varkos, a being whose physiology was intrinsically linked to crystalline structure and pure logic, projected his voice across the conclave with crystalline clarity, each syllable a precise vibration. Hierarch, the inefficiency of this delay is unacceptable. Our operational readiness mandate dictates immediate deployment. The designated subjugation window is narrow. Prolonged exposure to unknown variables introduces unacceptable risk to hegemony doctrine. Explain the hesitation when the target civilization has demonstrated such profound, immediate internal failure. Varkos was referencing the anomaly. The Vanguard fleet, on the very edge of the outer system, had detected an unprecedented energy discharge, originating from the immediate vicinity of the Sol 3 system's fringe. It had been an explosive signature that dwarfed even early-stage thermonuclear detonations, localized, focused, and impossibly rapid. The initial report classified it as a catastrophic weapon failure on the part of the humans themselves, a suicidal act confirming their primitive status. But the energy signature had vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only clean vacuum and the residual gravitational echoes of something impossibly massive being instantaneously disassembled. Logic dictates, Delegate Varkos, Thrax responded, his own voice a deep, resonating current of controlled authority, that a species capable of such focused, self-inflicted annihilation cannot be immediately dismissed as primitive. The energy output recorded surpassed the theoretical maximum output of any projected Sol 3 industrial core by several orders of magnitude. We do not deploy into a known variable of such extreme volatility without comprehensive understanding. The reports from Scout Vessel Ethel are contradictory. They report no fleet activity, no defensive structures, only the aftermath of what appears to be deliberate systemic collapse. The Cygnian Syndic, designated Monitor Row 7, interjected next. The Cygnian civilization communicated through complex light patterns projected onto the air, a silent, shimmering debate visible only to those attuned to their specific frequency spectrum. Their meaning, however, was translated instantly through the conclave's universal buffer, a language of clinical, detached analysis. The psychological component remains the most erratic factor. Their historical archives, which we have managed to partially decrypt, depict a species obsessed with self-reflection, paradoxically incapable of sustained peace, yet possessing a deep, almost pathological adherence to abstract codes of conduct they term ethics and honor. The self-destruction signature strongly suggests an ethical imperative overriding basic survival programming. This is alien to all known sentient evolution models. Row 7. Shimmering patterns resolved into an image of a crude, stylized human symbol, a crossed shape, which their analysts believed represented an ancient, profound commitment. Thrax leaned forward, the obsidian of the dais catching the light sharply. They did not destroy their planet. They destroyed their ship. The ethel probes confirm. The energy release was centered on one singular, large vessel that had breached the initial defense perimeter. Our projections indicated a conventional, heavily armed exploratory probe. Instead, it executed a localized event horizon collapse, vaporizing itself entirely. The data suggests an intentional, highly precise act of self-immolation, designed to prevent something, or someone, from reaching them. The Viridian delegate, a silent, towering structure of polished green crystal, finally responded, their voice synthesized as a calm, echoing baritone devoid of inflection. Fear of contamination, a quarantine protocol initiated from within, a species that preemptively destroys its own vanguard upon sensing superior external engagement vectors. What manner of strategic calculation is that? It violates the prime directive of expansion, of survival, of acquisition. It suggests they value the integrity of their system above their ability to interact with the broader galaxy. This is not arrogance, hierarch. This is terrifying rigidity. The tension in the conclave tightened, a palpable pressure against the sensory organs of the assembled dignitaries. For the Zalosian hegemony, expansion was the only logical progression. Retreat, hesitation, or systemic sabotage were diseases. Humanity, in its first overt gesture, had presented the hegemony not with an enemy to crush, but a philosophical paradox to dismantle. The slow, atmospheric build of their fear was the realization that they could not categorize the threat, and anything unquantifiable represented potential extinction to a civilization built on rigorous quantification. For 3 standard cycles, the debate raged, a storm of polarized light, subsonic vibrations, and data streams scrolling across the conclave's periphery. The Krill argued for immediate, overwhelming force to neutralize the remaining perceived threat. The Cygnian syndics cautioned for deeper analysis, arguing that such deliberate self-sacrifice indicated hidden layers of defense mechanisms that brute force would only trigger. Thrax, ever the pragmatist, understood the core issue. Their long-range surveillance indicated that Sol 3 was not defenseless, merely silent. The destruction of the Vanguard vessel was a warning delivered with catastrophic finality. Finally, Thrax issued the decree that would alter the hegemony's trajectory. We cease the preparatory mobilization. We move to Phase 0, direct, nonviolent contact. We must understand the mechanism of that collapse. We will send a single diplomatic envoy, minimally escorted, to the 3rd planet. We will treat them as an unknown quantity of potentially superior strategic depth, rather than a target of subjugation. If they possess the capacity to destroy a vessel designed to penetrate our tactical shields with a single, localized event, they possess the capacity to destroy our entire advance force before we can initiate warp withdrawal. This declaration was met with a stunned silence, the first indication of genuine alarm that had ever permeated the Grand Conclave. The human vessel, designated Triumph of Reason by their cryptic broadcast logs, was small, almost ridiculously so, especially when compared to the imposing, shielded orbital platforms the Zalosians deployed for routine surveillance. It was a sleek, dark form, utterly lacking in the external weaponry arrays the hegemony expected from a species capable of planetary bombardment. It was this very simplicity that unnerved the strategic analysts. It moved with an unsettling, inertial grace, making no effort to mask its approach trajectory toward the primary satellite of the 3rd planet, a small, reflective sphere they used for astronomical observation. The Zalosian response was precise. A single observation shuttle, the Veritas Prime, carrying the designated first contact specialist, emissary Quallen, and 2 heavy kinetic suppression units. Quallen was chosen for his profound understanding of xenopsychology and his utter lack of personal ambition, a necessary buffer against unexpected ethical traps. As the Veritas Prime approached the small, dark human craft, the atmospheric readings were meticulously monitored. There were no active energy signatures, no complex jamming fields, only the faint, predictable radiation signatures of a closed life support system. Emissary Quallen, the central intelligence nexus of the Veritas Prime, communicated through the shuttle's internal interface, the voice dry and synthesized. The human vessel remains inert relative to our approach vector. Their external hull appears to be composed of layered, non-reflective polymers, a Prometheus. V energy absorption technique. Their shields, if present, are entirely passive. This confirms our initial low-threat assessment, yet the self-destruction event remains a logical contradiction to this material simplicity. Quallen, a being whose skin shifted color according to emotional modulation, currently a pale, analytical gray, processed the data stream. Contradiction is the only constant in their sparse historical record, Nexus. Prepare the primary communication array. We will initiate contact using the agreed-upon universal greeting protocol, emphasizing non-aggression and intellectual curiosity. Remember the hierarch's primary directive. We seek understanding, not immediate conquest. The triumph of reason responded not with a chaotic burst of static or aggressive jamming, but with a measured, perfectly modulated frequency that bypassed the Zalosian encryption layers as if they were not there. It was not a brute force hack. It was a key slipped smoothly into an open lock. The communication that followed was instantaneous and startlingly clear, delivered in flawless Zalosian dialect, learned perhaps through the momentary access to deep space telemetry networks the humans possessed. To the vessel bearing the sigil of the hegemony, we acknowledge your arrival at the agreed-upon demarcation line. We are aware of the loss of the Vanguard probe. That action was taken under specific pre-authorized protocols. We await your formal introduction. The voice was neither harsh nor soft, but possessed an unusual, resonant quality, a profound sense of groundedness that seemed to absorb the ambient noise of the vacuum. It was the voice of a being entirely comfortable with its own existence, regardless of surrounding threat. Quallen felt an involuntary flicker of deep blue, a trace of confusion and immediate caution, cross his skin. The communication was too smooth, too formal. They were not reacting with terror or aggressive posturing. They were treating the hegemony's meticulously crafted diplomatic framework as a mundane scheduling formality. "We are emissary Quallen of the Zalosian hegemony," Quallen responded, maintaining the prescribed slow cadence. "We are here to establish dialogue regarding the sovereignty of this celestial body and its inhabitants. We require clarification on the energetic event that eliminated our scout vessel." A pause followed, long enough for Quallen to review the kinetic suppression protocols his escorts were currently running. A purely defensive measure, yet one that suddenly felt utterly inadequate against a species capable of erasing matter with a thought. "Clarification is simple," the human voice replied. "The probe violated the specified exclusion zone perimeter. Our designated quarantine mechanism was triggered. The vessel was determined to possess materials and informational architecture fundamentally incompatible with long-term galactic stability. The action was the execution of a primary, self-imposed safeguard. We are not interested in galactic integration at this juncture." Quallen's skin shifted to a deep, troubled violet. "Self-imposed safeguard? You destroyed your own exploration vessel to prevent its penetration of your local space. That implies a deliberate rejection of outreach, of knowledge dissemination. Why this profound isolation?" "Isolation is not the objective," the human voice returned, calm and absolute. "Containment is. We understand that your presence implies annexation. We possess neither the philosophical framework nor the military desire to engage in conflict for planetary resources or political dominion. Therefore, we removed the first variable that threatened this delicate equilibrium, the possibility of your sustained presence within our system." This was the reveal. Not overwhelming force, but preemptive, terrifyingly ethical self-mutilation of their own exploratory capacity. They had sacrificed their ability to communicate outward in order to enforce non-entry from others. Quallen transmitted a secure channel request back to the Grand Conclave, bypassing standard channels, using an encrypted signature reserved only for existential threats. "Hierarch Thrax, the situation is profoundly divergent from projection. The humans are not primitive. They are operating under a strategic paradigm we cannot map. They possess technology capable of localized space-time manipulation, yet they apply it defensively to destroy their own forward assets based on an internal ethical calculus. They are not arrogant. They are pathologically self-regulating. I advise immediate withdrawal and prolonged, passive observation." Thrax's response was immediate, a sharp spike of urgency cutting through the calculated calm of the diplomatic environment. "Emissary, you are authorized to proceed with cultural exchange protocols. We must ascertain the source of this technology and the nature of this quarantine. If they are capable of this feat, we cannot afford their suspicion. Initiate dial." OG protocols centered on mutual technological assessment. Do not provoke. Quallen returned his focus to the tiny human vessel, whose silhouette remained steadfast against the distant, swirling marble of Earth. Humans of Sol 3, he projected, shifting his tone to the carefully calibrated diplomatic register of respect. The Zalosian hegemony acknowledges your capacity and respects your decision to enforce boundaries. We accept the principle of non-interference with your primary habitat. However, the destruction of an exploratory vessel, even if unauthorized, represents a significant diplomatic loss. We seek to replace that loss with dialogue concerning the principles underlying your technological mastery. The pause that followed felt geological in its scale. Then, the human response was startlingly direct, bypassing layers of protocol the hegemony had spent millennia constructing. We are not interested in exchanging technology for peace treaties, Emissary Quallen. We are interested in demonstrating that our capabilities are not a threat to your hegemony, merely a threat to instability. If you wish to understand the mechanism that destroyed our probe, the mechanism you fear, we will demonstrate it. But this demonstration requires us to breach the quarantine perimeter we just established. Do you accept the risk of observation? Quallen's skin pulsed violently, a chaotic mix of orange, black, and deep green, the Zalosian equivalent of profound shock bordering on existential dread. To invite the source of the danger into the observational field was an act of breathtaking strategic recklessness. Yet Quallen remembered the hierarch's caution. They are calm, ethical, logical, powerful. Their logic, however inverted, demanded demonstration. We accept the observation, Quallen stated, his voice barely a whisper across the secure link. On the main Zalosian strategic screen back in the conclave, the image flickered. The small human ship did not accelerate toward the Zalosian observation shuttle. Instead, it performed a series of rapid, precise maneuvers that defied known physics, not using thrust, but seemingly folding the space around it momentarily, allowing it to reposition hundreds of thousands of kilometers in a fraction of a second. It reoriented itself, its dark hull facing outward, away from the hegemony fleet positioned far beyond the Kuiper belt, pointing toward the empty void beyond the system's barycenter. Then the human vessel did something that caused the Viridian sensors to overload momentarily. It did not fire a beam, launch a projectile, or create a field. It simply changed. The hull of the Triumph of Reason began to glow internally, not with heat, but with an impossible spectrum of light that defied the Zalosian understanding of electromagnetic radiation. It wasn't energy release, it was organization. For a period that felt eternal, the small ship acted as a focal point for the raw, latent energy fields of the system itself. The visual field shimmered, and then directly in front of the human vessel, an object materialized from the vacuum. It was not a weapon. It was a structure of terrifying, crystalline complexity, vast enough to dwarf the largest Zalosian dreadnoughts, yet it had formed from nothingness in less than a standard minute. It pulsed with ancient, dead technology, clearly not of human manufacture, bearing etchings and design motifs that sent waves of anthropological distress through the hegemony archives. It was a relic of a civilization so far beyond the Zalosians that their entire 10,000-year empire felt like a brief tribal skirmish in comparison. The human voice returned, imbued now with a quiet gravity that resonated with the sheer scale of the object they had conjured. Emissary Quallen, what you are observing is not our technology. It is their remnant. The energy discharge that destroyed our initial probe was not an accident or a demonstration of offensive power. It was the necessary application of precise counter-frequency modulation to prevent the remote reactivation of this dormant beacon. Quallen could only stare, the Zalosian sensor readouts scrolling uselessly, unable to classify the materialized object, which radiated an aura of profound, dead intelligence. This structure, the human continued, is an interstellar distress beacon, active for millennia, left dormant by an entity that feared what might answer it. Our ancestors discovered the technology necessary to listen to this galaxy, but we also discovered the residual echo of what this beacon calls. It broadcasts a signature that confirms galactic instability, predator species, and systems ripe for consumption. When our scout vessel reached the outer limits of your proximity, the latent energy signatures from your approaching fleet were enough to trigger the beacon's tertiary defensive cascade, a process that, if fully realized, would have alerted every predatory network within 3 galactic sectors to the presence and general disposition of Sol 3. The silence in the conclave back on Xylos was absolute. The hegemony had dedicated its entire military and political structure to maintaining a precarious regional dominance, built on the assumption that they were the apex predator, or at least within the top percentile. The idea that humanity, in its infancy, had not only detected but actively suppressed a system-wide alarm mechanism, one potentially tied to threats beyond the hegemony's comprehension, was a political and existential annihilation of their self-image. "We destroyed our own probe," the human explained, the resonance of their voice conveying a deep, weary ethical burden, because its proximity initiated the beacon's failsafe, which would have drawn catastrophic attention to this system. "We vaporized the probe to stop the beacon from broadcasting a larger signal. We did not attack you. We attacked the signal you inadvertently activated. We are not conquerors, emissary. We are custodians of a very dangerous secret, and we are utterly uncompromising regarding the protection of those who are unaware of the true nature of the void." Quallen felt the crushing weight of his civilization's folly. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that the greatest danger in the galaxy might not be the predator they knew, but the ancient predator they had nearly awakened. His skin turned a uniform, deep, resonant black, the Xylosian sign of irreversible conceptual paradigm shift. "Humans," Quallen managed, his voice straining, "your actions suggest a level of ethical responsibility that far exceeds the developmental markers of a Class D civilization. Why have you kept this knowledge, this technology, confined to your isolated system? Why not share the burden of this custodianship?" "Because," the human voice replied, now tinged with a profound melancholy that shook Quallen to his core, "sharing the knowledge of the void only guarantees that the beacon will be heard sooner by those who wish to respond to the call, not silence it. We have learned from our history that when civilizations meet, the exchange of fundamental knowledge often leads to mutual destruction or the weaponization of that knowledge against the source. We learned this lesson brutally. We require solitude to maintain necessary silence." The massive, spectral alien structure, the beacon, began to fade, its energy signature collapsing as the human ship presumably modulated its field again, reclaiming the synthesized matter and returning it to latent space. The demonstration was over. The triumph of reason drifted silently again, a small, dark speck against the overwhelming expanse. Quallen initiated the recall sequence for the Veritas Prime, his mind racing to translate this revelation for the hierarch. The hegemony was not dealing with a rival empire. They were dealing with a self-appointed, highly effective galactic fire brigade, one dedicated to keeping the real monsters asleep. Back in the Grand Conclave, the news shattered the established order. Hierarch Thrax listened to the encrypted report. The visualization of the materialized relic burned into his awareness. The Krill delegate Varkos sputtered in outrage, demanding immediate military action against this blatant display of superior, yet morally restrictive power. The Cygnian syndics, however, went silent, their light patterns oscillating in a complex, mournful rhythm. "They possess the capacity to erase our entire approaching armada with a single, calculated application of physics we cannot replicate," Thrax stated, his voice resonating with a new, profound humility. "They chose not to. They chose to demonstrate the reason they acted, to prevent the activation of something ancient and terrible. The hegemony has operated on the assumption that conflict is the highest form of strategic interaction. These humans define conflict as a tactical failure of ethical restraint." Thrax looked towards the silent Veridian delegate, the species known for its deep, almost spiritual connection to ancient galactic memory. "Veridia, does your deep analysis yield any correlation with the structure they briefly manifested?" The Veridian structure pulsed, shifting to a color that was almost white, a color of unimaginable age and sorrow. "Hierarch, that structure matches fragmented myth cycles detailing the remnants of the architects of silence. They predated the formation of the current spiral-armed stellar populations. They were not a civilization. They were a systemic defense mechanism against the unbound echoes. If the humans have the technology to interact with, let alone suppress, the architect's signal, they are not merely advanced. They are inheritors of a necessary burden." The political fear transformed into a unifying, terrifying reverence. The Xylosian hegemony, masters of the immediate, were confronted by a species who understood the long, cold game of cosmic survival. "We will comply with the human demarcati." "On," Thrax decreed, his voice unwavering. We will redeploy the Vanguard fleet to the edge of the system and initiate a permanent observation quarantine, designated Zone of Ethical Respect. We will not probe further. We will not attempt contact again unless invited. We will devote hegemony resources not to expansion, but to understanding the nature of this unbound echo that humanity is keeping leashed. The Krill delegate Varkos made a final, desperate attempt at resistance. Hierarch, this is capitulation. We sacrifice strategic advantage for a philosophical ghost story. Thrax turned his full attention to Varkos. Delegate, the tactical loss of a scout probe is insignificant. The strategic loss of provoking a species capable of rewriting localized causality to protect its isolation is total extinction. They demonstrated calmly that they value the silence of the void over the chaos of communication. We will learn their silence. We will mimic their restraint. Quallen, still in orbit near the small, dark human ship, received the immediate transmission of the new hegemony decree. Full compliance, immediate systemic withdrawal. He prepared his final communication before departing the zone. Humans, Quallen transmitted, his own physiological shifts now settling into a stable, hopeful spectrum of gold and soft blue. The hegemony accepts your parameters. We withdraw. We offer, in lieu of technological exchange, an alliance of silence. We will guard the perimeter from the outside, ensuring no other hegemony faction stumbles upon your secret or triggers your failsafe. The response was immediate, delivered with the same quiet authority. Emissary Quallen, we appreciate the gesture. However, we require more than just silence from the hegemony. We require partnership in maintenance. The complexity of containing the architect's signal requires continuous, multispectral monitoring. We cannot afford to be the only species aware of the necessary sacrifices. A partnership in maintenance? Quallen queried, the concept of an alliance based on mutual obligation rather than mutual benefit being another profound cultural hurdle. What is required of us? We require access to your long-range deep-field sensor networks and predictive analysis platforms, the human stated. We need access to data streams that track unusual gravitational lensing, dark matter fluctuations, and any non-standard energy readings across the nearby sectors. We are focused internally on maintaining the signal dampeners. We need eyes looking outward for the source of the signal that this beacon was designed to detect. This was the true reveal of human capability and intent. They were not isolating themselves out of fear of the galaxy, but out of responsibility to the galaxy. They were the sentinels standing guard over a cosmic pressure valve, and they were extending a hand, a professional, pragmatic hand, to the only other major power in the vicinity. We will provide complete access, Quallen affirmed instantly. We will dedicate our finest analytical minds to the maintenance of your silence. Good, the human replied. We will transmit the necessary integration protocols shortly. One final matter, emissary, your assessment of our ethical paradoxes, our history of internal conflict followed by sudden, drastic acts of ethical imposition, is a point of continuing study for us. You observed our history. You saw the violence. We observed instability, followed by terrifyingly effective self-correction, Quallen confirmed. Precisely, the human voice concluded, the resonant tone dropping slightly, becoming almost private, philosophical. That violence you observed, that was the precursor. That was the crucible in which we forged the singular, non-negotiable axiom that the survival of the whole, even if it requires the sacrifice of the self, always takes precedence over the ambition of the part. We learned that lesson through near-total annihilation of our own species several times. We do not repeat that experiment. We will guard the silence, emissary. We trust you will do the same. As the Veritas Prime executed the slow, reverent withdrawal, Quallen watched the distant, small ship. Humanity had not come to conquer Earth. They had already conquered themselves. They had achieved the ultimate strategic victory over their own base nature, leaving them free to confront threats the hegemony hadn't even conceived of. The Zalosian Empire, built on the belief that power equaled right, was now voluntarily stepping back into the shadow of a species that defined power by its ethical restraint. The cinematic tension of the impending invasion had dissolved, replaced by the far more profound, atmospheric tension of shared, existential vigilance. Back in the conclave, Hierarch Thrax watched the final sensor lock confirm the hegemony fleet's retreat beyond the gravitational boundary. The vast holographic map of the Sol system, moments ago a target acquisition grid, was now overlaid with the new, inviolable human boundary, a shimmering, invisible sphere of absolute non-entry. The nature of the threat has changed, Thrax murmured, addressing the silent, newly unified council. We sought galactic dominance through force. Humanity defines dominance as the capacity to refuse force when necessary. We have spent 10 millennia ensuring no other civilization could threaten our existence. These humans have spent their entire history ensuring that they do not threaten existence itself. Their ethical framework is their ultimate weapon, and it is one we can only respect. The Viridian delegate projected a final, complex light sequence, a summation of ancient knowledge now confirmed by recent, terrifying events. The architects of silence built their beacon not to send a general distress call, but to specifically warn against a type of energy signature that spreads across the void, a signature that feeds on chaotic expansion and territorial acquisition. The hegemony's modus operandi, our very core drive, was precisely the signature the architects feared. The realization settled over the conclave with the crushing finality of a collapsing star. The Zalosian hegemony, in its relentless pursuit of conquest, had been functioning as an inadvertent dinner bell for an ancient, cosmic horror. Humanity hadn't attacked them. Humanity had shielded them, and the entire local cluster, from their own self-destructive behavior. Thrax stood alone on the dais, the polarized energy lights reflecting off the polished obsidian, no longer with arrogance, but with the solemn duty of a newly enlightened apprentice. The true war was not against the species of Sol III, but against the ancient darkness that humanity had silently kept at bay. The cinematic moment was not the battle that never was, but the terrifying, necessary alliance that had just begun. An alliance forged in the shared, cold realization that some frontiers are better left unexplored, and some secrets are better guarded by a small, quiet blue planet determined to prioritize duty over dominion. The galaxy had just become infinitely larger and infinitely more dangerous, demanding a level of collective responsibility the Zalosians were only now learning, under human tutelage, to bear.